Welcome into the Weather Wednesday podcast here at New England Storm Center. I almost said the Winter Wednesday podcast, but I guess that would be appropriate considering winter will be making a comeback over the course of the next week in a big way. It's disappeared a couple of times so far this season. We've had a very up and down season, and I realize we've certainly been up more than we've been down, but it's either we've been up in the stratosphere with the temperatures or we've been down in the Arctic. There's been very few just seasonable days in between. And we can take a look at this if we just walk through the temperature profile from this winter quickly, and I promise we will get to the storm that is coming in tonight that will go through Friday morning. We're going to get to the details on that forecast in just a moment, but first, let's just walk through the temperature profile that we've experienced here this winter. Starting off in mid-December, there was a pretty good-sized snowstorm for northern New England. Some areas saw up to 20 inches of snow. That was a long time ago now. But then the week before Christmas, of course, we had that big storm that was much more indicative of a hurricane than a blizzard here. And the temperatures shot into the 50s and even the 60s during that storm. But as soon as that storm pulled away, an Arctic cold front came crashing through the region and set up a bone-chilling Christmas weekend. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day were the coldest in years this year. That didn't last too long, as on New Year's Eve, it was very, very mild. Where I am, it was 50 degrees at the stroke of midnight for 2023. And it stayed above average through about mid-January. Then, of course, we had that train of storms. We had 3 storms in the course of 1 week. And those storms were very messy times for New England. And then it warmed back up after those storms. But then the first weekend in February, the first Friday and Saturday, it got a little chilly. Temperatures dipped just a smidge. Of course, that was our epic Arctic blast. Temperatures, well, not the temperatures, but the wind chills dropping into the negative 60s. The coldest wind chill reported in a populated place during that blast was negative 61 in Frenchville, Maine. Berlin, New Hampshire hit negative 60. That was likely the coldest city in New England. That didn't last long, though, did it? On Sunday morning of that blast, the temperatures were well below zero. But by about midday in the early afternoon, 1, 2 p.m., it was in the 40s in northern New England, 40s above zero in northern New England. And it was shot up into the 50s and even near 60 in places of southern New England. So that's basically how it's gone this whole winter. It's gone from one extreme to the next. The Christmas storm, it went from very warm to very cold immediately. And then, of course, during the Arctic blast, it went from insanely cold to spring-like warmth immediately. I mean, immediately, within literal hours, just a couple hours, the temperature went from way below zero, way below average, to way above average. So it's just been up and down all winter long. And again, I realize it's been up more than it's been down. But anyway, that's just how this winter's gone. And with March coming up, that's going to be the defining factor of this winter. But let's get back to the more pressing issue for New England, and that, of course, is this storm coming in. Some big snow for northern New England and a messy storm for southern New England. So let's talk about it. So the main setup will be very cold air in Canada and very mild air just to the south of New England. Now, the cold air will drain into New England at the surface, but a warm layer of air aloft will lift through the region. The million-dollar question is just how deep the warm air layer will be. If it's just a shallow layer of warm air, you will get more sleet. If that layer of air is deeper, you will get freezing rain and icing going on. So with this warm layer of air sitting in southern New England, it is just going to create a very messy, sloppy, dreary day for southern New England. For at least Thursday morning, there will be a dry slot in the storm Thursday afternoon. Basically, the storm is going to come in two waves. There's going to be coming in overnight Wednesday through Thursday morning. That will be the bulk of the precipitation. There will be a break Thursday afternoon before a second wave comes in Thursday evening into the early morning hours of Friday. And again, this storm is just going to be the kitchen sink for southern New England. Southern New England will likely see all the types of precipitation. There will be times of sleet, freezing rain, snow, and plain old rain. Again, what the dominant precipitation type will be dependent on just how much of that warm air layer there is. There is a potential for potentially up to 1/4 of an inch of ice in places if that warm air layer is deep enough and if it can remain in place long enough. In some areas of southern New England, the warmer air will make it to the surface, and when that happens, the icing will switch over to plain old rain. So that's going to be something to watch, is just how much freezing rain falls, especially in western and central Massachusetts, as well as really all of northern Massachusetts as well. We'll have to watch and see how much freezing rain falls versus sleet and snow. So heading further north into northern New England, the other $1,000,000 question is going to be just how far north that layer of warm air makes it. As of now, it does look like that a shallow layer of warmer air will get into southern Vermont, southern New Hampshire, southwest Maine, and that will allow some sleet to mix in with the snowfall there. That will keep the overall snowfall amounts lower in those places, which is why on the snowfall map you do see lower amounts there versus when you get further north. So we'll call it central New England, northern Massachusetts, southern Vermont, southern New Hampshire. The question will be, how far north does that warm air makes it? And again, how deep that warm layer is. As I mentioned, it will likely be snow and sleet for those areas. But if that warm air layer is deeper, they will also get into some freezing rain. And of course, it can always be a mixture of the three. This is a complex storm. Whenever you get into this warm air layer, the forecast is always rather uncertain, and there'll be a lot of mixing because it is hard to tell just how deep that warm air layer will end up being. But once you get into northern New England, the warm air layer likely won't get that far north. It will be snow from beginning to end, and where that is going to happen, that's where you're going to have the biggest snowfall amounts, upwards of a foot. Some higher elevations of Vermont and New Hampshire could see over a foot. As you can see on the accumulation map, I do have a 12 to 18 inch zone over the White Mountains. And then as you get into eastern Maine and even northwest Vermont, you are getting further away from the center of the storm. So the snowfall amounts will taper off there. So that is the basics of this rather complex storm. This is kind of the story that we've had really since January, are these messy, mixy storms. Messy, mixy storms. A messy mix coming from these storms. So if you do want to see the latest forecasts and detailed forecasts and more localized forecasts, check out newenglandstormcenter.com. I will be posting forecasts there leading all the way up to this storm. So again, newenglandstormcenter.com. And of course, during the storm, I will be having the live updates feed running, as always, again, on newenglandstormcenter.com. So that's going to do it for this edition of Weather Wednesdays here at New England Storm Center. So keep it here, keep it on newenglandstormcenter.com, and you'll hear from me again next Wednesday.